right, welcome to the last lecture for Unit 8. Like always, we want to start with our weekly outline. As you can see, this week is going to be a busy week. On Monday, I would suggest that you watch the lecture. On Tuesday, you have your Unit 8 readings. You've got 5 readings this week, 45A, 45D. There's a reading on over here, what was happening during World War I. There's a reading on over there, meaning Europe during World War I. And then, of course, you have the Espionage and Sedition Acts reading. On Wednesday, note that we do not have an online class, okay? You do have an assignment that will supplement for our online class that is going to be the reading on the U.S. versus Schenck court case and then the Eugene Debs address to the court. You're going to read those and then do the evaluation of each. There's a total of 6 questions there to do after the reading. You also have the Unit 8 documents that are due this week. There's 9 documents, I believe. 1 question with each document. Make sure you are reading carefully, highlighting evidence from the documents. Your short paper for Unit 8 is due this Friday. You should have been working on that over the past few weeks. And then you will have your unit exam posted on Friday. That unit exam will be closing at 11:45 because it's that forms. It doesn't go to 11:59. Your study guide will come out with your This Week in U.S. History email. Make sure you look that over to help you get ready for that exam. There will be 30 multiple choice and 1 short response question. We're going to go back to the format of the test that we have been doing all along. Okay? Any questions on what you have for this week? Let me know. I know it's a little bit heavier of a week, but after this Friday, you are on break for a week. Be watching in Teams because I will post an extra credit opportunity for over break that you can take advantage of. All right, let's get started. We are going to be covering the United States in World War I throughout this lecture. We're going to look at what was happening in the United States leading up to the war. We're going to look at what happened in the United States during the war, and we are going to look at the impact of the war on the people. And finally, we'll end up with how does the war end? And in class this week, we will cover the Treaty of Versailles a little bit more deeply. All right, let's get started. As the war begins, the United States is going to take that initial stance of neutrality. We even push that stance to being very close to isolation. As the war gets a little bit more extensive in Europe, there are people in the United States who definitely believe that neutrality, where we are trading, is going to put the United States in harm's way and that we should push for isolation. Wilson actually keeps telling the people, I'll keep us out of war, I'll keep us out of war. He's actually going to win in the next election with that campaign. But at the beginning of the war, we start to see propaganda circulating regarding the German actions during World War I. Germany is going to be painted as that evil, scary force that's torturing Europe, especially with their invasion of Belgium. The United States starts to get this different perspective on the war, and we're going to have really 3 groups that start to come out during this time. We'll have the isolationists who say we need to stay out of everything. Do not get involved in trading. Do not get involved in any of the ideas that are associated with World War I. Let's bury our head in the sand and focus on ourselves. You're going to have the internationalists that say, you know what, let's keep trading. It's okay to keep trading. It benefits our economy. That's okay that we keep trading. We're not really fighting in the war, so it's fine. Let's not attack unless we get attacked. And then you're going to have the interventionists who say, and you can see in the root of that word there, that we should intervene. We should intervene for the Allies against Germany due to that propaganda that was circulating around, and we are going to need to push into this war to make sure that it ends, and that it ends in our favor. That kind of attack before you get attacked idea. Now, what really starts to draw the United States into the war is the US had plans to trade with both sides, but the British are not going to stand for the United States trading with the Central Powers. There is going to be a blockade that is put up around Europe that is meant to prevent the United States from staying neutral, put us in harm's way, and kind of force us to be seen as an ally to the Allies. What happened was British naval ships spent the war patrolling the North Sea, and in the North Sea, they're going to intercept and detain thousands of merchant ships, many of them U.S. ships, thought to be harboring cargo that was bound for enemy shores. This is kind of a really aggressive display of their power over the seas, and is gonna bring out some anger in neutral countries, one of those countries being the United States, because Germany was a source of money. Trading with Germany made money for these neutral countries. Tensions are going to heighten as the British military declares what's called a military area in November of 1914. And this people, those neutral nations, are going to see as a breach of international law. And what happens is, in international law, you are supposed to be allowed to ship what's called non contraband goods to any nation, whether they're at war or they're not at war. And what the British were doing were seizing those ships that had non contraband items, that may have been medical supplies, that may have been food supplies, anything that's basically not weapons to use in the war. And in this blockade, when they breach those international laws, some of the neutral merchant ships are just going to agree to just go to the British ports for inspection, and then they're going to be escorted through the British minefields to their destination in Germany. But this causes a lot of problems because Germany's not getting the goods that they're supposed to be getting. The merchant ships aren't getting where they're supposed to be getting. They're being put in danger. And what this does is it really pushes the United States to have to pick a side, because it's either, follow the rules of England and see what happens there, or get attacked. And the United States, again, is just trying to remain neutral, trying to trade with both sides, to the point where it gets us into trouble. And Germany is going to be very aware of what Great Britain is doing. They're going to be well aware of what's happening. And they will even attempt to have the same kind of blockade around Great Britain. And that doesn't do them well at all. Germany is also going to put themselves in a little bit of a pickle, and you guys probably remember this, with their tactics of unrestricted submarine warfare. Now, what happens is we are going to see, first of all, the Sussex incident. The Sussex incident is going to take place in March of 1916. And what happens is a passenger steamer that was crossing the French Channel, the Sussex, was sunk by a German submarine. And this left 80 casualties, which included 2 Americans that were wounded. This attack is going to prompt the United States to kind of intervene and talk sternly is the best way to put it, with Germany, saying you cannot sink any more of our ships or we're going to war with you. So what we come to in May of 1916 is what's called the Sussex Pledge. Now I always laugh at this because Germany basically says we promise that we won't sink any more ships unless we notify you ahead of time, and we certainly won't sink any more merchant passenger ships. But ultimately, this doesn't work. Germany is going to sink more of the United States ships. It's going to sink the Lusitania. And when they resume that unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917, we will get involved in the war because the Lusitania was a passenger ship that was thought to have those contraband items of war on there. But what it's going to end up being when the Lusitania is sunk, it's many of the casualties will just be the passengers, many of them U.S. passengers, and that pushes the United States over the edge and into the war. There's going to be a couple other pieces that push the United States into the war, but as of 1916, the United States is in this position of we're going to stay out of the war. Wilson even runs on the idea that I will keep us out of war as I have kept us out of war to date. We at this time, the Sussex Pledge was still in place. The United States seemed like we were in a good position with the European powers fighting, and Wilson's going to win in 1916. But things change rather quickly from neutrality to war. And on top of the unrestricted submarine warfare, what pushes us into the war, and some of you guys have remembered this and told me about it in class, is going to be the Zimmermann Note, also known as the Zimmermann Telegram. Doesn't matter what you call it, it means the same thing. Most historians are going to agree that American involvement in World War I is going to be inevitable. So by early 1917, when the Zimmermann telegram comes out, people were like, okay, we knew this was going to happen. So what is the Zimmermann telegram? This is going to be a letter that was penned by a German foreign secretary, Arthur Zimmermann. This note is intercepted, and British code breakers are going to encrypt the message from Zimmermann that was intended for a German ambassador in Mexico. They're going to go ahead and tell us what is in the Zimmermann telegram. And what was in there was that this message was supposed to give the ambassador a famous set of instructions. And the instructions were that if the United States entered the war on the side of the Allies, then this this German ambassador von Eckert was to approach the Mexican president and offer a secret wartime alliance. Now, this alliance between Germany and Mexico was kind of a you get in on the war with us, we'll give you something in return. Germany promised to provide military and financial support for Mexico to attack the United States. In exchange, Mexico would have been able to get back the territory that was lost in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. In addition to that, this von Eckert was told to use Mexicans as a go-between to get the Japanese Empire to join the German cause as well. Now, when the British decode this Zimmermann telegram and hand it over to the United States in February 1917, this message is splashed all over the front of the newspapers nationwide. And now the diplomatic relations between Germany and the United States are going to be severely injured. And then, when Germany resumes the unrestricted submarine warfare and starts preying on U.S. vessels in the Atlantic, this just pushes us to completely abandon that idea of isolationism, that promise that Wilson ran on, the "will keep us out of war," and it just kicks us right off the edge into the war. And on April 2nd, 1917, Wilson is going to abandon the policy of neutrality and ask Congress for a declaration of war against Germany and the Central Powers, and the United States is going to join the Allies just 4 days later. Now, as if the actions of the unrestricted submarine warfare in the Zimmerman Note weren't enough, the United States is going to get pressure from Allied propaganda saying, you're the only ones not fighting. And we expect you to fight with us. You can see from the posters on the slide, the United States is seen as lazy. Wake up, Americans. The Britishers calling us, saying, you're needed, come across now, telling us we're the only ones that are absent. So that Allied propaganda is also going to kind of entice the United States to join as well. All right, so while we enter the war, we've got to look at what the heck was happening on the home front in the United States throughout the war. So first, like I said, we have this declaration of war in 1917. And just a few weeks after we enter the war, the U.S. Congress is going to pass what's known as the Selective Service Act in May of 1917. And what this did was give the U.S. President, President Wilson, the power to draft soldiers. So what Wilson does is he goes before Congress and says in the beginning, in April, he says the nation is going to pledge material resources to help the Allies, which are France, Britain, and Italy at this time, to defeat the Central Powers. So the very beginning of this declaration of war was just, we'll give them all the resources that they need. We'll help them out. We're an industrial power. That's the best help that we can give them at this time. But that's not what the Allies needed. The Allies needed fresh troops to relieve their exhausted men on the battlefields, especially on the Western Front, and the U.S. could not and did not immediately provide that. The United States desperately tries to improve our military preparedness, but at the time of Congress declaring the war, the U.S. had a small army of volunteers. We had about 100,000 men, and that was not enough, nor were they well trained enough to help Europe fight the way that they were fighting. So to fix this situation, Wilson is going to push the government to adopt what's called military conscription, or the draft, okay? And he's going to say this is the most democratic way that we can get enlistment up for the war. So the Congress is going to pass the Selective Service Act in 1917. This act is going to require all men in the United States ages 21 to 30 to register for military service. And within just a few months, that number of 100,000 men goes up to 10 million men across the country that had registered in response to the draft. And this is going to incredibly help the Allies. It is easy to state that Germany would have won the war if the U.S. Army had not intervened in France in 1918. The British and the French were barely hanging on. By the end of 1917, France had lost 3 million men, British had lost 2 million men, and in the French army, there was actually a mutiny in 1917. Half of its combat divisions refused to attack the Germans. The British weren't doing much better. They lost 800,000 casualties in the course of a year that really led up to the notorious 3-month assault on the Muddy Heights, where the British lost 300,000 infantrymen and gained just 2 miles of ground. So the British and the French are losing men faster than they can fight and gain land. By 1918, the French reserves of military-aged recruits were literally a state secret because there were so few of them alive. You've got to think, they've been fighting in this war for at least years now. And they have killed off an entire generation of military aged men. And you can't just birth more and have them be old enough to fight that fast. It takes years to build up that generation, and it just wasn't happening. So the United States needed to give men. They needed to give men, especially on the Western Front. And this is what we do. That's how we help. We do send our men straight towards the Western Front, and it gives this kind of renewed sense of life in the war. Men aren't going to be the only way that we help in the war, though. The other ways that we see this mobilization for war is that the government is going to take full control over production and over the economy. Now, this is a huge, monumental, massive change than what we've been talking about in how the government interacts with business. The government, up until this point, has really said, you know what, we'll take the back seat. Business knows what they're doing. We aren't going to get involved. But now we are in war. We have to have government control. We have to have the government looking out for what is being produced, how it's being produced. And the way the government does this is kind of a two-front way. First, you're going to see the War Industries Board be created, and then you're going to have the Food Administration be created. Now, these two government agencies, these two government committees, if you will, are going to control what products are being produced, not only for U.S. citizens, but what products are being produced that we can supply to the war. And it's going to encourage Americans, we're going to talk about this in a second, it's going to encourage Americans to change what we're consuming and how we're working, who is working, and push us towards giving everything we can to the war. Because yes, we needed to give men, but we also needed to give product. And you can see the posters. I always love looking back at these posters to see how we convinced people to do what needed to be done. Attack on all fronts. And you can see you have your soldier, you have a laborer, and you have a gardener, all saying we each have to attack in different ways. And then the other two there, will you help the women of France save on your wheat here so we can send it over there? Will you have a part in victory? Will you go out and plant? Can we grow our own food so that we don't have to be buying it from the stores? Instead of those producing can send it overseas and you can take care of yourself, so to speak. Another part that we're going to see is, like I was just saying, we're going to convince the people to take care of themselves. So the impact on the U.S. economy, first we're going to see victory gardens. I don't know how much I have to explain this to you. Most people remember this. But we are going to see victory gardens at this time where people are growing their own food. Like I said, instead of having to go to the store and buy what's being produced by the big business, they can do it on their own. And this goes along with Liberty bonds. This idea here where if you bought a Liberty bond, you were helping the government. And the way that a bond works is it's basically a loan to the government. Okay, so if you buy a Liberty bond, what you do is you are purchasing kind of a note from the US government, and the note is going to say, okay, I'm giving the government, let's use $10 because we know that Ms. Neubauer is great with numbers. So let's say I'm giving the government $10. What the note says is the government will not only pay me back my $10, but it's going to pay me back interest on that $10 for however long it takes them to pay me back. So not only have I given the government money that's needed to supply the war, but I'm also going to make money on it. So Liberty bonds were used to raise instant cash for the war, and then eventually the people would make their money back. So it's an IOU from the government in a sense. Now, we are going to see daylight savings time come out of this as well. Now, daylight savings time is going to be a little annoying for us uh, because we don't like it now. I have to say, it's very hard to adjust to daylight savings time now, but it is going to be used in order to save in the United States. Germany was actually the first country to enact daylight savings time. It came in April of 1916. Germany used it to conserve electricity. And then a few weeks later, the United Kingdom is going to introduce summertime, doing the same thing. It, daylight savings time was meant in the United States to conserve just like the other countries around us were conserving. We're going to see it as a wartime measure, and what's going to happen here is the president or Congress is going to actually pass this with an override of the president's veto, and we are going to see daylight savings time be put in place in the United States to conserve here in order to supply the war. We're telling people we're conserving energy so that we can be more productive and be a better ally in wartime. Now, when this should be a pretty easy concept to understand, but during the war we had the um, the draft, the civil service bill, or selective service bill, sorry. And when we have that and we have all of these men who are leaving to go fight in the war, this is going to result in a labor shortage. Remember, we're industrialized, we've got all these factories. Not that women weren't working in the factories, but women weren't working in all factories. So when the men leave, women come out of the home in bigger numbers to make up for that labor shortage. Now, I have to tell you, because every year there's people that get this mixed up. World War I is not Rosie the Riveter. That is not until World War II. Okay, so while I talk about this, that may be coming into your brain, but that campaign does not come until World War II. In World War I, we are going to see women come out of the home to work in the factories. Also, to make up for that labor shortage, we are going to see the Great Migration. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, white supremacy was largely restored across the South in the 1870s, and we had those segregationist policies that we talked about, Jim Crow, black codes, and those segregationist policies are going to force Southern black people to make their living in the sharecropping system. Now, the sharecropping system did not offer much economic opportunity, especially in the massive crop epidemic in 1898. So, not offering a lot of opportunities down south post Civil War era. Also down south, the KKK had been officially dissolved in 1869, but they continued underground after that with their intimidation, violence, and lynchings of black Southerners. And this didn't go away. Okay, segregation and violence, intimidation of black Southerners was running rampant. So when World War I breaks out, the industrialized areas in the North, Midwest, and West are going to face those shortages of industrial laborers, and women aren't going to be able to fill all of the shoes that were emptied by us going to war. Plus, we are going to have to up production, which means we need even more workers to make what we need for the war. So, with war productions kicking it into high gear, we're going to see recruiters enticing black Americans to come to the North. And this is going to kind of shock some white Southerners. We are going to have black newspapers publishing advertisements, kind of dangling the sparkly money saying there are opportunities in the cities in the North and in the West, and they're going to offer first person accounts of success. And by the end of 1919, we're going to have about 1 million black people that are leaving the South and traveling by train, boat, bus, all the way up to the North. And we call this the Great Migration. In that decade between 1910 and 1920, the black population in major northern cities is going to grow by huge percentages. In New York, it's going to grow by 66%, Chicago, 148%, Philadelphia, 500%, and in Detroit, 611%. Many of the new arrivals are going to get jobs in factories, slaughterhouses, and they're going to be working in conditions that are pretty dangerous and not so great. Female migrants are going to face a little bit harder of a time finding work because there is a lot of competition for those domestic labor positions. But they they come up to escape the conditions that they were facing in the South, that economic paralysis that they were experiencing, and the extreme racism of the South. What they're met with in the North, though, is competition for employment and competition for living spaces. The cities, we have to remember, we talked about this before, the cities are already overcrowded. And now we're experiencing this mass influx of migrants, and that's going to make them even more overcrowded. Now, in the North, while segregation was not legalized as it was in the South, racism and prejudice are still going to be widespread. In fact, in the U.S. Supreme Court, it had been declared it had declared racially biased housing ordinances unconstitutional in 1917, which meant that you couldn't stop people from living in a certain place because of their race. But some residential neighborhoods in the North are going to put in place these requirements of white property owners to agree to not sell to black people. And that is going to remain legal until the court struck it down in 1948. So throughout this whole time that we're seeing this rise in the black population and in the North and in the Northwest, we are going to see this kind of de facto segregation put into place. The way that they're going to do this is by raising rents, not renting to any black people. And we're going to see a resurgence of KKK activity after 1915, so smack dab in the middle of this massive movement. And in the summer of 1919, we are going to see the greatest period of interracial strife in the United States at the time. And this is going to become known as the Red Summer. And this is going to include a disturbing wave of race riots. One of the most serious race riots was the Chicago race riot of 1919. This riot is going to last 13 days and it's going to leave 38 people dead, 537 injured, and over 1,000 black families without homes. So the Great Migration did not come without its struggles. While we often look at it as this great, massive movement of black Americans to different parts of the country, it is not sunshine and butterflies once they get to the North. They are still going to be met with segregation and discrimination. But the major piece that we see being filled here, or the draw that we see here, is the labor shortage, which was created by World War I. When we look at World War I, we also have to look at the impact that this war had on civil liberties in the United States. Okay, civil liberties being the rights of people. We have to look at two major pieces of legislation that are going to be passed during World War I. And you're going to read extensively about the two cases that you see on the screen through your evaluation this week, your evaluation assignment. You also have a reading on the Espionage and Sedition Acts this week as well. But let's talk. When the United States finally decides to enter World War I in 1917, there is opposition at home by some Americans that wanted to remain neutral. They don't want to get involved in the conflict. And there are going to be groups of people in America who oppose the draft. Shocker, right? Because it was the first of its kind in the United States. Some of this dissent, a lot of it, is going to come from the most vocal groups of pacifists, anarchists, and socialists, many of which are going to be Irish, German, and Russian immigrants. And those are going to, and their loyalty to America is going to be openly questioned, because when you question the United States at war, you are hurting the war effort. When we are in war, the main goal of the United States is to keep its people unified, to keep its people as this one unified, cohesive front, saying we all are fighting this war together. The United States is one big happy family. But what this dissent of these people shows is that the United States is not one big happy family. There are people here who do not want to be involved in the war. President Woodrow Wilson is going to be terrified of anti-war speeches and street pamphlets because he says this is going to undermine the war effort. So what he does is he goes to Congress and they come up with two laws. First, they come up with the Espionage Act, and then they come up with the Sedition Act. And what these two acts do is criminalize any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the United States government or military, and any speech intended to incite insubordination, disloyalty, mutiny, or refusal of duty was said to be illegal. Now, we may be thinking, I know this is a stretch, but we may be thinking this has happened in the United States before. This definitely happened in the United States before. But these acts are going to be incredibly different than the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were passed in 1798, and then they were repealed or expired in 1802. So these are different. These are new laws, okay? These laws are very broadly worded, and ultimately they will become viewed as some of the most heinous violations of the Constitution's free speech protections. But they were written in an environment of wartime panic. What they result in is the arrest and prosecution of more than 2,000 Americans, some of whom are going to be sentenced to up to 20 years in prison for sedition, that's speech against the United States. Now, how I remember these is espionage kind of reminds me of spies. Nobody likes a spy, especially during wartime. We don't want spies that are going against the United States. So these two are going to make speech and actions against the government and our war effort illegal. Now, we're going to have a handful of convictions that become very, very popular, famous during this time. One of the court's landmark decisions is going to be Schenck versus United States. We have a socialist, Charles Schenck, who is going to be charged with conspiracy to violate the Espionage Act because he was planning to print and distribute leaflets, which are basically pamphlets, that were going to urge Americans to disobey the draft. The court is going to vote unanimously to uphold the conviction, citing that there needs to be necessary limits on free speech during war times. What we see here is a famous quote that is going to come out about these decisions. One of the most famous decisions is going to be penned by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who introduces the idea in the Schenck case of clear and present danger. He is going to compare the actions of Schenck to shouting fire in a crowded room. He says you just can't do that. You cannot encourage people to dodge a draft in the middle of a world war, because it will create trouble for the United States. It puts us in direct danger of attack if we do not show that we are united. You cannot do that. And this is going to be carried into the next case that you'll read about, and that is going to be the Debs versus US case. This is going to be incredibly close. The Debs case is going to be incredibly close to the Schenck case, in that we are going to see Debs, who gets arrested for distributing leaflets encouraging readers to oppose the draft. Okay, so he does the same thing. He is going to be found guilty. He is going to be put in jail. He's going to remain in federal prison for a very long time. He is going to receive a nomination for president while he's in jail in 1920, and he gets nearly 1 million votes. Now, Wilson is not going to give Debs a pardon. Debs is going to get a pardon from Warren G. Harding, who shows him a little bit of compassion. But that won't be until later on down the road, because while we are in World War I, Debs gets to sit in jail because he attempted to do the same thing that Schenck did, pass out pamphlets, and even in a speech that he gives in the picture that you see there, he encourages people to not join the draft, don't support the government. Both of these cases, though, give us the question of the First Amendment. Do we or don't we have the right to say you should dodge the draft? I don't know. That's up to you. But the Supreme Court was supposed to be created to check the constitutional powers or unconstitutional pieces of legislation. But in these cases here, it proves that it was not immune to wartime fears of insurrection at home. And you'll read further about these cases in your activities for this week. But I want you to think about the war fever was real. And when you look at these two posters here, censored, let's censor our conversation about the war. Don't write anything in your mail. And then you have quiet, know your place, shut your face. And there's another one that says loose lips sink ships, saying that your speech at home really threatens our place in the war. So war fever was real, and anybody who threatened our place in the war was seen as just that, a threat. Now, we are going to start this section. I just have a few things to say for us to end the war, and then we're going to do the rest of the Treaty of Versailles in class this week. So let's take a look at this. At the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the Great War is going to officially end. Germany is going to surrender. This is going to come after Germany realizes that the Allied forces are just better prepared. They are just better equipped, and they are going to win this war. After the United States enters, it is going to kind of be the deflating of the balloon that was the German confidence that we needed. And I know the paper says 6 a.m. because it was 11 a.m. French time. And the war really does keep going until 11 a.m. Some people are going to say that because the fighting was continued all the way through 11 a.m., that there are going to be men that died that didn't need to die. But nonetheless, no matter what way we look at it, the war is going to end with a German surrender. Now, the secret alliances at the end of the war, which comes with the Treaty of Versailles, are going to be looking to divide the land of the losers. And we are going to see the Allied powers like Italy, Great Britain, France say, we are the ones who have been fighting this war. We are the ones who have been affected in the biggest way by this war. We should be the ones that get the most land at the end of this. And they're going to force Germany to really turn over its territories. And we'll go more into depth on that in class this week. But the United States is going to take a completely different approach to the end of the war. Wilson's stance is going to be, there can be peace without victory. There doesn't have to be a victor declared, okay? What we need to do is use this as a learning tool and plan to never have this again. And that's where we get Wilson's 14 points and where the United States sits on this view of how do we end the war, how do we use this as a turning point to make sure we never see another world war again. And we'll get into how we clearly know that that doesn't work in class this week. I want to end with looking at your weekly outline. Don't forget, on Wednesday, we are not going to have an online class. Instead of that online class, you are going to do the Schenk and Debs evaluation worksheets. You have your Unit 8 documents for this week. You have your short paper due this week. And you will have your unit exam on Friday of this week. Any questions on anything that you do this week, please let me know. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you in class.